Okay, let's talk about The Exorcist. But for a moment, try to forget the spinning head, the pea soup, all of it.
All the iconic moments.
Because the biggest shock of that 1973 film isn't really what happened on the screen. It's how a production that was just plagued by chaos, by budget overruns, and accidents.
Real serious accidents.
How that became maybe the biggest artistic and financial accident in Hollywood history. We're going to do a massive examination of this landmark film.
Right.
But we're deliberately setting aside the immediate plot. We're not doing a play-by-play of the story.
Exactly. We're focusing on, the ecosystem around the film. Our sources for this are really comprehensive. They cover the origins, the truly grueling production history. And I think most importantly, the lasting, just seismic shift this movie caused in the culture. It's still a key cultural reference point, even now, 5 decades later.
So our goal here is to synthesize all of this knowledge, but do it quickly and thoroughly for you. We need to understand the nuts and bolts of how a deeply risky production.
And the studio fought it at every turn.
A production fraught with that opposition, transformed into this undeniable cultural earthquake. This film didn't just smash records, it fundamentally redefined what major studios thought a horror film could be.
It really did. It set the stage for every big-budget, star-driven genre piece that came after it.
Let's unpack this.
To really get a handle on the film's unique power, you have to anchor yourself in the source material.
Right.
Because this story didn't start as Hollywood fiction. It began with a highly publicized real-life event, the 1949 exorcism case in Maryland and St. Louis.
That real event, the inspiration for William Peter Blatty's 1971 novel, it concerned a young boy, right? Not a girl.
Correct. A boy who was given the pseudonym Roland Doe, to protect his identity. The ritual was performed by a Jesuit priest, William S. Bowdern, and it took place over several weeks.
And Blatty, who was a Georgetown graduate and a pretty successful screenwriter already, he takes this material and crafts a novel that at first kind of struggled to find its audience.
It did. The novel was, well received by critics, but the sales were just lagging. And that all changed in one single pivotal media appearance.
The Dick Cavett Show.
Exactly. Blatty was invited on, and he used that platform to discuss the possibility, or as he argued, the certainty of the devil's existence. This was 1971.
I mean, in a secularizing age on national television, that's a bold topic.
It was a huge topic, and it tapped into this sort of hidden spiritual hunger that I think a lot of people didn't even realize they had.
So how did that one appearance, that one conversation, change the book's entire trajectory?
The reaction was instantaneous. It was massive. The discussion of the supernatural, but grounded in a specific documented case, it just captivated the audience.
And the book sales.
They exploded. It immediately shot onto the New York Times bestseller list, and it stayed there for over 50 weeks.
Wow.
And that sudden, explosive popularity is what forced Warner Bros. To get serious about adapting it. They realized they had a cultural phenomenon on their hands, not just another genre novel.
Okay, so then you have this sprawling, very intellectual novel, and Blatty, who wrote the screenplay himself, has to turn it into a tight 2-hour film.
Right. And he chose to largely follow the plot, but he made some very, very pointed adjustments that really define the film's pace and its intensity.
The biggest one being the timeline.
Yes, he condensed the overall time frame significantly. It makes Reagan's descent and the priest's involvement feel so much more immediate, just inescapable.
But compressing the time like that must have had a cost. You lose things.
You do. And it meant that several important subplots were either diminished or, in some cases, completely eliminated from the film version.
Like Detective Kinderman's investigation.
Exactly. In the novel, the narrative spends a lot more time with him, following his investigation into the death of the director, Burke Dennings. Kinderman was a much more prominent figure.
Almost like a Columbo character, I've heard.
A perfect comparison. He forms this really significant, evolving relationship with Father Karras, trying to help him sort of reconcile the medical crisis with the spiritual one.
So the novel was almost 2 stories at once, a police procedural and a theological thriller.
Precisely. And in the film, that relationship with Kinderman is cut down to, 2 or 3 brief, very tense meetings. Another crucial element that got sidelined was Father Karras's long bureaucratic struggle to get official church approval for the exorcism.
I remember that from the book. It showed the church as this cautious, very modern institution, weighing the science, the risks.
Yes, but in the film, Karras asks, and the authorization is granted pretty quickly. It streamlines everything so the tension is purely personal and theological.
That feels like Friedkin's influence, that desire to just drive the emotional narrative forward without getting bogged down in, paperwork.
It was a very clear shift toward urgency. The film also reduced the presence of several supporting characters, like Chris MacNeil's staff.
Who kind of grounded the story in the novel.
They did. And by diminishing them, the film could focus almost exclusively on that terrifying, isolated dynamic between Chris, Regan, and the two priests.
And here's a layer that I think often surprises people, especially given the film's reputation for being so groundbreakingly graphic.
What's that?
That some of the most disturbing parts of the book were actually toned down for the screen.
Oh, they absolutely were. And this was mainly a practical decision. It was dictated by the casting. They knew they'd be working with a very young actress. Linda Blair was just 12.
And certain things just couldn't be filmed, or wouldn't be.
The most infamous example, and we should be careful here, is the crucifix scene.
That scene is incredibly intense in the film as it is. But the book goes even further.
Far further. In the novel, that sequence is described as much more prolonged and explicit. It links the possession with some very serious self-inflicted physical injury combined with sexual themes.
Okay.
The film, for all its revolutionary frankness, it really pulled back from that level of detail. It chose to suggest the horror rather than linger on the internal trauma Blatty described on the page.
They also made a pragmatic choice about an environmental detail from the book. Something that gave the room this constant, oppressive quality. The stench.
You're referring to the foul odor that permeated Regan's room in the novel. Mm-hmm. The book details that the possessed Regan suffered from persistent diarrhea, which, it contributed to this sickening smell.
A detail that's hard to translate to film.
It's a necessary artistic choice. The film medium doesn't really do continuous olfactory horror, so they chose to emphasize the visual and the auditory shocks, the demonic voices, the levitation, the pea soup.
Over the lingering horror of a smell.
Right. It makes sense for the camera, but you're right, it does sacrifice a key sensory element from the novel's atmosphere.
But the single most critical change, the one that I think fundamentally amplified the film's terror and its lasting impact,
I know what you're going to say,
was the complete removal of scientific ambiguity.
This is the critical juncture. Blatty's novel, being a work of intellectual inquiry, was structured to maintain a constant state of doubt. For every single horrific symptom Regan displayed, Blatty would counterbalance it.
How so?
He'd reference a real documented medical or psychological case where the exact same phenomenon had a natural scientific cause. The reader was never fully allowed to just settle on the supernatural explanation.
It was a constant argument with itself. It forced you to weigh faith against reason, page by page.
Precisely. But the film, it strips that safety net away entirely. After Father Karras, who starts as a psychiatrist with, professional skepticism,
right.
After he finishes his initial evaluations, that sustained scientific counter-perspective is just gone from the adaptation. The movie makes Regan's condition unambiguous. It is the devil.
There's no other way out. No natural explanation.
No. And by removing that possibility, the film forced a mass audience, many of whom had sort of drifted from traditional religion, to suddenly grapple with the chilling reality of pure, inexplicable evil existing in their modern secular world.
That is a horrifying high-stakes trade-off.
It amplified the terror exponentially. The film became less of a mystery and more of a visceral, documented confrontation.
And that journey from an intellectual thriller to this unambiguous confrontation was incredibly difficult. The production itself was just as dramatic as the story.
Oh, yeah. It was plagued from the very beginning with major disagreements over casting, over costs.
The film's ultimate success is really astounding, given those internal battles.
Director William Friedkin and the writer Blatty, they were set on making a realistic, gritty film. And that meant they wanted relatively unknown but very committed actors.
Ellen Burstyn, Linda Blair, Jason Miller.
Right. And this drew immediate, intense opposition from Warner Bros. Executives. They feared sinking this huge budget into a controversial genre film without the box office safety net of major stars.
And they had plenty of big names turn them down, which I'm sure only made the studio more afraid.
A huge list. A-listers like Audrey Hepburn, Anne Bancroft, Jane Fonda all rejected the role of Chris MacNeil. Shirley MacLaine, who was a close friend of Blatty's, she actively lobbied for it.
But Friedkin said no.
He rejected her outright because she had recently starred in a similar supernatural film, The Possession of Joel Delaney. He didn't want any baggage.
Ellen Burstyn eventually got the role after she told Friedkin something interesting.
Yeah.
She felt destined to play Chris.
Yeah, given her own childhood Catholic upbringing that she had later rejected, it was a personal connection that really resonated with the film's themes. But even then, the studio was hesitant.
They only accepted her after everyone else said no.
After all other A-list options were exhausted, yes.
And for Father Karras, there was a similar push for star power.
Oh, yeah. Names like Jack Nicholson and Paul Newman were floated. But it was Jason Miller, a successful playwright, who proved to be the perfect and maybe the most uncanny fit.
Because of his background.
His deep background in Catholicism. He had studied for 3 years in a seminary to become a Jesuit priest before he had a spiritual crisis. A crisis almost identical to the one Calais has in the story.
So he didn't just understand the role, he had lived it.
He basically walked into the audition and told Friedkin, "Karras is me." That level of emotional and spiritual identification was exactly what Friedkin wanted to ground the theological struggle in reality.
And the casting of Linda Blair as Regan, the most demanding role in the whole film, that was also a result of Friedkin valuing this authentic reality over, an easy choice.
Friedkin chose Blair, even though he considered older actresses who could handle the mature dialogue, because he found her to be a normal, happy 12-year-old girl.
But also one who was incredibly candid.
And unself-conscious. The story from her audition is famous. When he asked her if she knew what masturbation meant, she replied, frankly, "It's like jerking off, isn't it?"
That complete lack of shame convinced him.
It convinced him she could deliver those shocking lines with a kind of innocent conviction.
And the studio pressure continued, even with the older priest, Father Marin. They wanted Marlon Brando for that role.
Desperately. But Friedkin, again, refused. He was afraid Brando's reputation would completely overshadow the film's serious tone.
So he looked for someone else, someone who evoked. What was it?
Gravitas and spiritual exhaustion. He eventually settled on Max von Sydow after he was inspired by a photograph of the Jesuit paleontologist and philosopher Pierre Teilhard de Chardin.
A man with a face etched with weariness.
Spiritual and physical weariness, exactly.
So once the casting was finally locked, Friedkin's single-minded focus on achieving this disturbing, visceral realism became the mission for the entire production.
Yes, and he became infamous for an unconventional and intensely manipulative directing style designed to get genuine, raw reactions from his cast.
The stories are legendary, and frankly, some of them are difficult to hear.
They are. For example, to get a truly shaken reaction for the scene where Father Dyer is ministering to the dying Karras.
What did he do?
Friedkin actually slapped Father O'Malley, who was a real priest playing dire hard across the face, just moments before they filmed.
He slapped him.
Yes, purely to ensure a solemn, visibly stunned, and literally shaken reaction in that final single take.
It speaks to an absolute commitment to the shot over the comfort of the performer. And he didn't stop there.
No. He also used auditory shock. He'd fire blanks without warning behind Jason Miller during certain scenes to provoke a startle response.
And we see the result of that manipulation in one of the most iconic scenes, the projectile vomiting moment.
A scene so perfect in its sheer disgust.
And completely engineered.
Friedkin told Jason Miller that the vomit, which was this thick, porridge-colored like pea soup, would hit him in the chest.
But it didn't.
No. When they filmed the take, Friedkin secretly had the tube redirected so that the stream hit Miller directly in the face,
resulting in the genuinely disgusted reaction we see in the film.
Miller was, as you can imagine, furious, but the footage was indelible.
It's astonishing that actors continued to work under those conditions. But beyond this intense performance manipulation, the production used technical achievements that were pioneering for the time.
Absolutely. Especially in replicating the physical conditions Blatty described in the novel.
The most famous being Regan's perpetually chilled bedroom.
Right. The novel emphasizes the cold that accompanies the demonic presence. So to get that visibly chilled air, the condensation of the actor's breath, Friedkin installed a massive $50,000 refrigeration system on the set.
$50,000 in the early 70s. For a freezer, that's an astronomical sum.
It was. And this system cooled the entire set down to a punishing minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. That's minus 29 Celsius.
And that imposed huge constraints on the filming.
Extreme constraints. The hot set lighting was constantly threatening to raise the temperature and ruin the effect, so they could only maintain that critical cold and film for a maximum of 3 minutes at a time.
3 minutes.
The entire complicated exorcism sequence, which they shot in script order, took over a month to complete. They were often getting only about 5 usable shots each day.
That glacial pace must have contributed hugely to the budget overruns. But it also birthed some of cinema's most instantly recognizable images.
like Father Merrin's arrival.
That shot, Merrin stepping out of the taxi, silhouetted in the misty street lamp glow, staring up at the window, it's a masterpiece of mood.
And Friedkin took direct visual inspiration from a painting.
The Belgian surrealist René Magritte's 1954 painting, Empire of Light.
Right. And what's fascinating about that painting is the contrast. It juxtaposes a night scene, a dark street, a glowing street lamp with a bright, clouded daytime sky.
It creates a feeling of something being out of time.
Exactly, a temporal displacement, something familiar but deeply unsettling. And Friedkin used that same contrast to evoke Blatty's description of Merrin as a melancholy traveler frozen in time.
Carrying ancient knowledge into a modern, spiritually dark world.
Perfectly put. And the practical effects, which still hold up incredibly well today, required that same level of dedication, particularly the aging makeup.
Makeup artist Dick Smith was central here.
He worked a true miracle. He had to age Max von Sydow, who was only 43 at the time, by 30 years to convincingly play the elderly Merrin.
Critic Pauline Kael called it one of the most convincing aging jobs I've ever seen.
And it took 4 hours every single morning. The famous head-spinning effect, of course, was achieved using a life-size animated latex dummy of Reagan.
Which was so realistic that Linda Blair herself was reportedly uncomfortable being around it.
Yes. And we have to talk about the infamous spider walk, a legendary piece of horror footage.
The scene where Reagan crawls down the stairs backward, contorting her body.
That was achieved by a stuntwoman named Ann Miles. She practiced that terrifying feat for 2 weeks and ultimately performed the full sequence without the special safety harness that had been designed for her.
But Friedkin cut it.
He cut it just before the premiere. He felt it came too early in the narrative. It was only restored for the 2000 director's cut.
Which led to this decades-long debate among fans about whether the footage even existed at all.
And that initial cut meant Ann Miles went uncredited for years, which sadly cost her subsequent stunt work. It just highlights how much was sacrificed for this production.
All of these challenges, the innovative sets, the meticulous direction, the constant retakes, they contributed to massive delays and ballooning costs.
Which directly fed the mythology of the so-called curse.
The initial budget was projected at a manageable $4.2 million.
And it ended up costing $12 million. The schedule spiraled from 85 days to over 200. And there were genuine, bizarre production disasters. A fire mysteriously destroyed almost all the sets except for Reagan's room.
A sprinkler system damaged another set. The statue of Pazuzu for the opening sequence was shipped to Hong Kong by mistake.
Right, instead of Iraq, causing a 2-week delay while they scrambled to get it back.
And most tragically, this desperate commitment to realism and speed led directly to serious injuries for the cast. And we really have to acknowledge this, especially given Linda Blair's young age.
It's truly awful to think about. Ellen Burstyn suffered a fractured coccyx during the scene where Chris is thrown backward across the floor.
And they used that take in the film.
They used that take. The injury caused her chronic back problems for life due to inadequate immediate treatment.
And even more seriously, Linda Blair fractured her lower spine.
She did. She was too loosely strapped to the rocking bed during an effect that went wrong.
Wait. They used the take where a 12-year-old actress suffered a lifelong spinal injury. That commitment to realism, knowing the pain was genuine, is just profoundly troubling.
They did. That take is in the finished film. And that injury resulted in scoliosis and a lifelong physical aversion to cold, which was compounded by the months she spent filming in that refrigerated set.
The physical toll on the leads was immense. And compounding the injuries, there was this series of unfortunate deaths during the year-long production, which just cemented the curse narrative in the public's mind.
Several people connected to the film passed away. Jack McGowan, who played Burke Dennings, died just a week after finishing his scenes. Vasiliki Maliaros, who played Mrs. Karras, died before the film even wrapped.
Chillingly mirroring her character's death in the story.
Yes. Crew members, including a night watchman and the operator of that critical refrigeration system, also died. The director, overwhelmed by all of this, actually asked Father Birmingham, the technical advisor, to perform an exorcism on the set.
And what was the priest's response to that?
Father Birmingham refused to perform a formal exorcism. He was afraid that doing a ritual like that would only increase the crew's severe anxiety and paranoia. So instead, he performed a general blessing on the set and the personnel.
But despite all this intense anecdotal evidence, the tragic accidents, our sources suggest there's a simpler and maybe far more cynical explanation for why these curse stories gain so much traction.
Film historian Sarah Crowther suggests the stories were, in effect, a brilliantly calculated marketing gimmick disseminated by Warner Bros.
A way to build buzz around a costly, troubled production.
Exactly, a production that desperately needed hype to justify its budget. Blatty later agreed that Friedkin probably initiated the curse narrative, maybe unconsciously, as an easy way to excuse the perpetual delays and ballooning costs.
Blatty's logic being that if you shoot a massive, complex film for over a year...
Exactly. He just noted that if you shoot a film for a year with large crews and dangerous effects, people are going to get hurt, people are going to die. The stories were fueled by real events, but they were certainly exploited by the studio. They turned legitimate tragedy into marketability.
The extreme hype, fueled by the budget reports, the curse rumors, the long delays, it all culminated in this immediate box office phenomenon that was completely unprecedented for a horror film.
The film's release on December 26, 1973, set records instantly. Audiences waited in these famously long lines, sometimes in absolutely frigid weather, down to 6 degrees Fahrenheit in New York City, just to buy tickets.
That level of dedication was just unseen, especially for a controversial genre piece.
And the audience reaction itself became a kind of theatrical spectacle. It was a key part of the movie-going experience.
Reports of strong physical reactions were immediate. Fainting, hysteria, vomiting.
It was so intense that one theater manager in Toronto claimed he had a plumber practically living here because of the constant cleanups in the restrooms.
Some theaters even arranged for ambulances to be on call.
Yes, on call for every single showing. The spectacle wasn't just on the screen, it was happening in the aisles.
What's fascinating, and I think often overlooked, is that the scenes causing the most widespread physical discomfort weren't always the overt supernatural displays.
That's a crucial insight. According to both Blatty and Friedkin, the scene that caused audiences the most visceral distress was the realistic cerebral angiography.
Where blood spurts from Reagan's neck during a graphic medical procedure.
Yes. Friedkin said the disturbance came from the realistic clinical depiction of medicine impinging upon the innocence of this little girl.
So the horror wasn't the demon. It was the violation of innocence by the cold, rational instruments of science.
It drove home this terrifying idea that even the most advanced clinical institutions of the modern world could not help her. In fact, they were subjecting her to needless physical violence.
And the scene was so medically realistic that it was reportedly used in radiological training films for years.
It was, which is just astounding.
Another surprising aspect of the initial reception was the diversity of the audience the film managed to attract.
It was a genuine surprise to the industry. The studio didn't anticipate or even budget for a significant Black audience. The film wasn't even booked into many Black neighborhoods at first.
But the reports noted that the lines in predominantly white theaters in Manhattan included audiences that were between a quarter and a third Black.
Right. And this unexpected demographic reach had wider industry implications.
It's sometimes credited with helping to end mainstream studio support for blaxploitation movies.
It is, because Hollywood realized that Black audiences weren't confined to a single genre. They would turn out massively for high-quality, high-budget mainstream features that resonated culturally.
Now, despite the graphic content and the extreme audience reactions, it only got an R rating from the MPAA, which became a huge controversy.
Many critics immediately questioned how the film avoided an X rating, which was a commercial death sentence at the time.
It prevented advertising, widespread distribution.
Everything. And critics openly insinuated that the MPAA had accommodated Warner Bros.
To ensure the commercial success of this very high-cost, troubled production.
That was the argument. They feared an X rating would cause a financial disaster for a major studio. The R rating, which just required minors to be accompanied by a parent, allowed the film to reach its massive audience.
And this rating issue led directly to local authorities trying to ban the film.
Absolutely. In places like Washington, D.C., authorities tried to invoke ordinances against scenes with sexual content, specifically targeting the crucifix scene.
Even though the actors were clothed.
Yes. It boiled down to moral outrage over the implied themes. Most dramatically, a theater manager in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, was actually arrested by police for obscenity after the first showing.
Arrested for screening the film.
Yes, though that conviction was later overturned by the Mississippi Supreme Court. But these legal and cultural battles just elevated the film far beyond standard entertainment. It became a social controversy.
And the religious and social responses were just as fractured and complex as the movie itself.
Officially, the Catholic Church lamented the timing of the release right after Christmas. But ironically, many church authorities privately considered the film to be faith-affirming.
Faith-affirming, despite the controversy.
Yes, because it so clearly acknowledged the existence of God and Satan and the tangible power of Catholic ritual. It was a clear, dramatic defense of faith in a secular age.
But that view wasn't universal within the clerical ranks.
No. Some priests criticized the actual theology portrayed, arguing that Father Karras and Father Marin were depicted as incompetent.
How so?
They argued the priests departed from the formal, prescribed ritual, that they were essentially trying to fight the demon hand-to-hand in a physical confrontation rather than relying purely on divine power and rigid adherence to the rite.
And evangelical leaders took an even harder, more condemnatory line.
Evangelist Billy Graham famously claimed that the devil is in every frame of that film.
A statement Blatty later called one of the most foolish statements I had ever heard.
Right. Blatty felt Graham had missed the film's core purpose, which he saw as a reflection on the necessity of faith.
But regardless of what theologians thought, the film caused genuine spiritual crises for some viewers.
It acted as a powerful psychological trigger. Many Catholic parishes reported an immediate influx of calls from people inquiring about exorcisms, particularly lapsed Catholics.
Why them specifically?
Because for them, the film powerfully resurfaced memories of the rigid, frightening pre-Vatican II descriptions of hell and the devil they had learned as children. It posed a potent challenge to their modern, secular worldview.
And beyond the religious fear, the film was also interpreted as a sociological mirror, reflecting the deeper anxieties of the era.
Absolutely. Historians and critics widely attributed the film's success to the extreme social and political upheavals of the late 60s and early 70s.
The lingering trauma of the Vietnam War, the cynicism from Watergate,
the widespread loss of faith in political and scientific institutions, the breakdown of order paved the way for supernatural chaos to feel plausible.
Stephen King called it a social horror film.
He did. He saw the possessed Reagan as symbolizing the uncontrollable, outspoken, rebellious youth protesting the establishment, a figure that patriarchal institutions like the family, the church, and the state could no longer manage or contain.
This theme sparked intense debate among feminist critics, who had radically different interpretations.
On one hand, many saw the film as deeply reactionary, a male nightmare of female puberty.
In that reading, the single working mother, Chris, and her uncontrollable daughter, Regan, have to be rescued by patriarchal authority figures, the priests, the male doctors.
Who restore the established moral and gender order? The chaos is contained by men of God.
A very powerful reading of it restoring the status quo, but there's a compelling counter-argument.
There is. Australian film studies professor Barbara Creed argued that the demon Pazuzu acted as a catalyst. The possession itself could be interpreted as a feminist act by exposing the inability of the male order to control the woman. The horrifying language, the filth, the violence, it was a rejection of enforced feminine innocence. It was challenging the established social order that was already being strained by movements like women's liberation and Black power.
So the demon was giving voice to the cultural upheaval.
In that view, yes. The film manages to be both a critique of the establishment and a reactionary defense of it all at once. That complexity is why its critical power endures. 5 decades later, the true impact of The Exorcist isn't just in its box office numbers. It's in the permanent change it brought to the film industry and its establishment as a permanent fixture in global pop culture.
The most immediate and undeniable impact was the legitimacy it brought to the entire horror genre. It's still a historical benchmark. The Exorcist was the first horror film ever nominated for the Academy Award for Best Picture.
It got 10 total nominations, and it won 2. Best Adapted Screenplay for Blatty and Best Sound. This level of industry recognition was absolutely transformative for horror.
It effectively ended the idea that the genre was purely exploitation cinema.
It forced Hollywood to acknowledge that horror could be high art, or at least high-budget serious drama.
And that success set a huge precedent for how Hollywood handled scary movies after that.
Studios realized that the big budgets Friedkin fought for were, in fact, necessary and profitable. This led directly to large-scale investment in the genre,
fueling major star-driven horror films like The Omen and the Amityville Horror.
And the practice of casting well-known, respected, dramatic actors in horror films became far more common. The Exorcist proved it was a vehicle for serious performance.
And the film's innovative use of music, or the lack of it, also had a profound influence on horror scoring that's still felt today.
Friedkin broke convention. He chose to use modern classical compositions, specifically Krzysztof Penderecki's deeply unsettling piece, Polymorphia, alongside very minimal original scoring.
And that choice led to the use of similar avant-garde techniques in later horror film scores.
Most famously in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Composers began using musical dissonance, sound massing, and tone clusters, complex groupings of adjacent pitches, to create this unnerving psychological atmosphere.
The score became less about traditional music and more about pure sound design used to create unease.
Exactly.
The Exorcist also helped solidify the modern franchise model we see everywhere now.
Before this, horror films that spawned sequels were usually low-budget affairs. The Exorcist was one of the first major studio films not planned as a series to launch immediate, high-profile sequels.
Starting with Exorcist II, The Heretic in 1977.
It established that pattern. Turn an unexpected box office hit into a continuous monetized series.
Beyond the film industry, the visual shorthand and imagery from the movie have become completely ubiquitous.
Everyone, even people who haven't seen the film, instantly recognizes the iconography.
Regan's rotating head, and maybe most powerfully, Father Merrin's silhouette when he arrives.
Standing in the misty street lamp glow, that image has been referenced and parodied everywhere. Saturday Night Live skits, films like Ghostbusters, political cartoons.
It's used to signify utter chaos or the arrival of dark forces.
And even heavy metal bands felt the linguistic power of the dialogue.
The iconic band Pantera named their 1992 album Vulgar Display of Power after a line spoken by the possessed Regan to Father Karras.
The film's dialogue just resonated on a visceral level that crossed genres.
And of course, the actual filming location became a physical landmark.
The steep, narrow staircase next to the McNeil House in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., became a major, unexpected tourist attraction.
Known everywhere now as the Exorcist Steps.
In 2015, a commemorative plaque was placed there, recognizing its cultural significance. And Friedkin himself said that having his name on that plaque was a greater honor than another Academy Award.
Finally, the film's impact on religious thinking is still felt, though the initial wariness has certainly faded over time.
While it caused widespread initial panic and theological debate, its enduring faith element ultimately allowed it to find a strange kind of acceptance, particularly among some Christian communities in the American South.
They saw it as acceptable horror because it explicitly warned against dabbling in the dark arts and affirmed the concrete existence of God and Satan.
It served as a cautionary tale, essentially. And there are documented cases of profound spiritual change because of the film. A British Baptist minister publicly credited the film with persuading him to abandon atheism and become a Christian.
Arguing that the film's depiction of inexplicable evil suggested that God was the only truly effective answer to evil.
And the financial legacy is just as immense.
Its lifetime gross of $441 million worldwide stood for decades as a benchmark.
And adjusted for inflation, it remains one of the highest-grossing R-rated films of all time. But that staggering success was marred by ongoing disputes. Litigation between Blatty, Friedkin, and Warner Bros. Over profit participation continued well into the 21st century.
So if we synthesize all of this, the film's incredible legacy isn't just in the shocking content it delivered, it's in how it functioned as this profoundly effective cultural barometer. It vividly reflected the intense anxieties of the modern world. Anxieties about shifting social values, the limits of science, highlighted in that terrifying angiography scene, and the enduring power of ancient faith in a secular era. The real achievement here was turning a brutally difficult production into an undeniable cinematic milestone that fundamentally changed how movies were made, marketed, and received.
And for you, the listener, consider this final thought. By stripping away the scientific and psychological ambiguity that was so vital to the source novel, the film adaptation forced an entire generation of moviegoers waiting in those incredibly long lines to collectively confront the singular, chilling question of pure, inexplicable evil. That sense of mystery, that theological dread that science could not answer, is why the steps in Georgetown are still visited today, and why the film's critical reputation continues to grow as a reflection of our enduring societal fears.
Thanks for listening.